This show is our spring show this year, so that means it was the last show of the year, and it's also the last show I will ever get to be a part of because high school's ending and I'm not acting afterwards. So I really felt like this was something I needed to do, and it really has a great message, and I really wanted to be a part of sharing that message to this community. The biggest challenge of this show is definitely the stage combat. It wasn't something I had ever really done before. I've taken a class, but it was a lot. It was physically intense, and I don't know. It was a lot to remember. I'm not a great dancer, so stage combat was something I don't know how prepared I was to do, but it was physically a lot. The hardest scene in the show for me it was at the beginning of the second act, and it started out with a pretty ensemble heavy scene. It was a lot of us on stage, and it was really funny, but I couldn't laugh. So they were all joking and they were kind of making fun of my character, so I couldn't laugh along with them, even though all the jokes were really funny. So that was a tough one to not break during. And then the second half of that scene was my hardest fight in the show. It was a one-on-one fight with the guy who played Miles, who was a character in the show. He played Agnes's boyfriend. And that was that was a really tough fight because it was long and it was just the two of us. So there was no break in it where I could breathe. So it was a tough scene. The most fun scene in the show is definitely the fairy fight, because we had two actresses who played the fairy, and they would come in and out. So it just looked like she was running really fast, but in reality, there were two actresses who were playing the same character. And it was super fun, and we had this really cool music in the background, and we were running around the auditorium, and we were all ad-libbing through it. So it just felt like that was a lot of our real characters coming through. The last scene in the show definitely resonated with me. It was all the action had finished, and it was the characters reading a letter that my sister had written me about why the game of Dungeons and Dragons was so important to her. And it was just, I think that's the message of the show, is that life is a story, and that game allowed them to be a person that they didn't feel comfortable being in real life. And that resonated with me because that's what theater has been for me for so many years. It's allowed me to present a version of myself that I don't present to the world on stage. And that got me every night. I would always be crying. If you saw me in the show, I was always crying in that scene. I loved Agnes because she was kind of snarky and funny, but you also definitely saw a very three-dimensional character. She was hurting. Her sister had died, and she was trying to come to terms with that. So I felt like my favorite thing was that I got to portray someone who was very, very real and very relatable. Hey, I relate to Agnes because I think, like a lot of high school students, I present a different person to people than the person that I feel like I am. Agnes struggled connecting with her friend and her boyfriend. They tried to talk to her, and she wouldn't tell them what was really going on in her life. And I thought that that's a message that a lot of high school girls can relate to, is not wanting to open up because we're afraid of being hurt. So when I first got the script, I made a playlist of all the songs and all the artists that the script mentions in reference to my character. So there's stuff like 10,000 Maniacs, Smashing Pumpkins, Cranberries, that I'd never listened to. It's all 90s rock. And I would play that when I was going to the school for the shows. I would play that in the dressing room. And it helped me sink into the character because it was something I had never listened to before. So when I was listening to that playlist, I was always focusing on being Agnes. Oh, that was a fun question. My favorite song on my Agnes playlist is probably, either These Are Days, which is 10,000 Maniacs. And it's a sentimental song about making memories, which is something that I was trying to keep in mind through the whole show. It was this is the end. And that's also what we ended up bowing to in the show. So our curtain call was to These Are Days. And also Beautiful Life, which is Ace of Base. And it's just a fun song that I actually got to dance to in the show. So ever since I was a sophomore, I've been making Quizlets for my lines, and it's usually been pretty easy. I think my first rule in this department, I was a sophomore. I had 16 lines, so I've always been like, oh, I can sit down and make a Quizlet. This one took me 6 hours. It was 390 terms, so I had 390 lines, and I would do the flashcards, I would do tests, and anything that Quizlet offered, I was doing to try and learn my lines. But saying them out loud, I think, really helps a lot. In this show, my favorite character is Calliope, who is played by Kaya Shivers, and she is an elf, and she kind of speaks like she's out of Lord of the Rings. Like, she doesn't understand, like, how anyone else talks. So all of her responses were very poised and precise. And she was so funny because we would all be like normal and talking normally, and then she would come in and be like, actually, and you were like, it was really funny. So I loved her. So this has definitely been the most impactful show I've been a part of at Wilsonville by a long shot. A big part of that is the connections that I made with a lot of the other actors, whether it was getting to know them literally on stage while we were acting or off stage. But I really enjoyed this because I got to bring to life like a very, very real character. And it was impactful for me because it helped me learn about myself and learn about the world we live in. So I loved it. I would recommend She Kills Monsters, honestly, to any teenager. Um, I I was a little hesitant going into it, honestly, because I never played Dungeons and Dragons and I didn't know that at all. And I was like, oh, okay, D&D. But I think the show is a lot about who you are is like a very, very valid thing. And I think it's an important message because it shows how we treat others and shows how we treat ourselves, because hiding who you are from yourself is never a good idea.